Hi everybody, my name is Ben. I'm a professional mechanic and today I will be showing you how to install your set of Viking bags on your own Vulcan 900 custom. This is an overview of what the kit includes. As you may have noticed, the kit is sold for a specific motorcycle, but as it turns out, it's just a universal set of saddlebags, and it comes with universal brackets, an assortment of random size bolts, some shims, and some washers. They do provide an installation instruction manual, which is pretty basic and will not cover any specific motorcycles. The saddlebag comes with this here piece of leather, which is intended for a saddle type mount, which we will not go for today because it might damage the paint, and I bought the kit for a hard mount solution. So you can simply remove this piece of leather, which is held on by some thumb screws on the inside of the bag. These are the two thumb screws that you need to remove in order to get rid of this unnecessary leather strap. After removing the leather strap, these are the four holes that we are left with that are used to mount this leather strap for the saddle installation. We will see if any of them could match up to the Vulcan as a starting point, because of course figuring out the first position is always the scariest part, and you don't want to drill unnecessary holes into your bags. We will be using the factory mounting points for the fender at the rear of the Vulcan, and I will offer up the bag to see if any of these previous holes would match up as a starting point. And as you can see, we could potentially fit the hole at the rear with the last hole in the bag. So we will be temporarily mounting it to see how it could match up. I will be removing this plastic chrome trim because when I remove the two fasteners, this is going to just be flopping around in the breeze, and I don't want to have the plastic trim preventing me from taking good measurements or being in my way when I'm off and on the bike with the bags for the test fit. With the two fasteners removed, this trim just falls right out. Notice how the factory washers on these factory bolts have a lip onto it. It's sort of a sleeve. It is to prevent the bolt from pushing on the plastic part of the trim. So when we do end up installing the brackets, we don't want to put them straight on the plastic. It is very important that we reuse the sleeve with the integrated washer to put the load on the metal part of the bike and not on the plastic. Always double check that the provided hardware fits with the hardware that is on the motorcycle. Somebody could have replaced the fasteners and changed the thread because they cross-threaded it or stripped it. So use one of the nuts provided with the kit to see if it fits the bolt provided with the kit, and then thread the nut onto the factory bolt to make sure it's the same thread pitch, or you can just match up the threads with the factory bolt. So as you can see, I used the two shims and the washer not to damage the inside of the bag, and I tightened it. And I've installed temporarily the bracket with the long part of the bracket to offset the bag from the bike, and the long part goes towards the bike in order to clear the components such as the brake caliper. And now is a good opportunity to see without drilling any holes and using just the factory hole that's not intended for it, but we can see how it looks on the bike, and if we need to make any adjustments, make it higher or lower or go from right to left, and see if the bag opens up nicely and if it's got enough clearance. Now we can see that in this position I can open it fully and it's not touching the seat when I open it, but I would not be able to go much further towards the front because it could be a problem while opening the bag. And also at the rear I have a great clearance with my turn signal indicator and a lot of clearance with the exhaust. Now is also a good opportunity to check for the first hole that we are gonna have to drill. We are satisfied with the position of the bag on the bike, but we need to make sure that it's somewhat level with the exhaust so it doesn't look goofy. And also we will be able to see what could be the position of the first hole to drill. If you read the instructions, they would have you use a paint marker and try to wiggle it in there to make a mark. But if you use your eye, you can see that the factory holes on the bike are perfectly straight, and it obviously could match up with the second hole on the bike in a straight line. And what I mean by that is, this is where the bracket was sitting, and from the rear of the bike I could see that the second hole would end up somewhere in this area, but with the bag straight on the bike, the hole would perfectly match up with this straight of a line. So instead of trying to wiggle your paint marker in there, you will simply measure these two holes center to center and then transfer the mark center from this hole to where it ends up over here, and drill your first hole in a perfect line with the factory holes, and then you're sure that everything is straight and everything fits perfectly. Now if you want to be sure to screw this up, you will measure from the start of the tape, but obviously this is not a very good reference point. I always like to start at 1 inch or 2 inch, it does not really matter, to make sure that the line is perfectly straight with the middle. And then we will be taking the measurement from the center of the line of 2 inches to wherever it ends up over here, and make sure to transfer the same measurement over here. I just transferred my measurement to the bag with this small black dot, but of course before we do any holes in this bag, we have to make sure that the assembly fits first, because if it doesn't fit, we will not be drilling the hole there. So we were using this bracket over here, and then of course the second bracket would go right over the hole, and we need to make sure that this brace will be able to fit. Otherwise, if it doesn't, we're gonna have to move the whole bracket up. So this is the way the bracket is intended to fit, but as you can see, this puts us very close to the bottom of the bag, because there's a lip over here and it's almost the size of my finger, and if I transfer it over here, the hole, if we drill this hole in this area, we're gonna be very close to the bottom of the bag. Of course, this brace is not intended to fit in this configuration. One could just angle the braces something like that, and use a piece of flat bar or any type of strip of metal and use it instead of the provided one. But we're gonna see if we can make the brackets go a little higher to use the brace provided with the kit. So now that we know that we need to go down a little bit, we're back with the first temporary installation that we did. Just checking the clearances again to make sure that we can go down without a problem. Everything looks good. We have a lot of clearance, so we will be able to drill our first hole. So back with the first measurement we did with the bracket, we can see that we don't have a ton of room to go up because we don't want to end up in this fabric. We can measure that we could probably go somewhere in the neighborhood of 3/4 of an inch up, and everything would fit. I used my ruler to mark the center line of the holes because we determined that the center line of the holes were a pretty good reference for the tilt of the bag, and I will measure about 3/4 of an inch up from the center of the hole here, and also 3/4 of an inch from my reference line over here, and then center to center to drill my 2 holes. So I marked the position of my first hole. I decided to go 7/8 of an inch, and I will drill this hole first. Of course, every time you drill a hole, you have to make sure that there is nothing that you can damage on the other side. In this case, there is a pocket for a cell phone, so make sure you move that out of the way. And you can also shim your drill bit to make sure that you don't go too deep. For instance, in this case, you can use the shims provided with the kit to shim your drill bit to make sure that only this much of the drill bit goes inside the case, so you don't damage the inside of the case. Always drill a small pilot hole first. It's easier to hit your mark perfectly with a small drill bit. Also, if you use a large drill bit first, it tends to walk or bite the material, and it's much more difficult to hit the center of your mark. And since this material is some kind of plastic, I do not recommend try using a center punch. Just use a small drill bit and try to hit the center of your mark. And I call these my exploration holes because it's much better to have a mistake with a very small hole instead of a big one, so you can make sure that you have the clearance you need for everything else. The 2 holes are drilled. I use the 5/16 bit because I don't like to drill a hole larger than it needs to be, and the bolt fits very nicely without any slop in the 5/16 hole. And I test fitted it on the bike, and of course it fits perfectly. If for some reason your measurements were a little bit off, you can always make the hole a little bit larger. Maybe try to go to 3/8, or if you're way off, maybe you could use your drill bit and try to make a slot instead of making a huge hole. Try to use your drill bit to walk it to one side to make a little slot out of your hole. I'm gonna be measuring by using the shortest bolt with a large washer on the inside of the bag. I will also be using a large washer on the outside of the bag. I will push the bolt through and use the bracket to see how much the bolt sticks out. And also don't forget to install your factory spacer washer, which take place of the plastic chrome trim, to see how much thread sticks out with the final assembly. In my case, I noticed too much thread stick out, and if I bolt it on this way, the bolt is gonna touch the fender and possibly damage it. Now that you have determined how much stick out you have on your bolt, say you have, for example, 1 inch, you will need to check if you have 1 inch clearance from the face of the bracket to the fender. In this case, you see we don't. we can measure the bracket to see how much thread we actually need, because we do not need the thread to protrude past the bracket and go too close to the fender. I have clamped my bolt in my vise in this configuration. Of course, there are many ways to do it. This way the bolt cannot turn. It gives me a nice flat plane to cut the bolt with my angle grinder, so it makes it very straight cut, and then I can unscrew the nut and it will clean up the threads nicely. After cutting my bolts, I put it back in with all the hardware, including the factory spacer washer that takes place of the plastic chrome piece. I just put this nut temporarily to hold this in place because I need 32 ends to film. And we will measure how much stick out we have after cutting the bolt. And we have about 9/16, and I measure the frame rail of the bike. The threads are about 9/16, so it's perfect. If it sticks out too far, it can hit the fender. So I put a large washer like this on the inside of the bag with the bolt going through to spread the load, and then I installed the two brackets temporarily with the nuts to make the bracket straight. So then I can place the brace at the bottom to mark my final holes. Notice how far now I am from the bottom of the bag, so I will have a nice spot to put my washers, and the hole won't be too close because the bottom of the bag is right here. Now time to drill the bottom holes. So I installed the brace inside the bag at the bottom in this configuration. Since the holes in the brace are way too large, I used some large washers on the inside to cover up the large holes that they make in their bracket. And also on the outside I did put some large washers to spread the load of the bracket, because since the surface area of this is so small, I don't feel comfortable putting it straight onto the bike like this, because when you tighten it, it can like go into the material, because this is not a very strong material, and when you use a washer like this you can spread the load. And this is the age-old question: is the engineer or the mechanic right? Well, I usually say the engineer designed it so that the mechanic can fix it. So you might want to consider putting washers at the bottom too. And these are not in the instructions either, but you would be better off spreading the load. This is what the final assembly of the bracket looks like. Again, these nuts are just here for a demonstration to hold the bracket in its correct orientation. So with my temporary nuts removed, I will be ready to offer this up to the bike. Do not forget the factory spacer washers to prevent the plastic trim from crushing. And also I recommend you place the plastic trim on the bike and you put both hands inside the bike and present it to the bike to end tighten the screws, because if you try to mess with the plastic trim on the bike while you try to wrestle with the bag, it's gonna be a big problem. And of course, since the gray washers look a bit goofy, you can totally paint them back matte black if you wish to, and angle the screws towards the bracket so it looks nice. I will be using a dab of blue Loctite on the threads to make sure that it doesn't come apart. We will be peeling these tags off finish off the installation. And this is the final look. According to the instructions provided by Viking, once you've set up one of the bags, you should put them back to back and mark the holes from one bag to the other and then drill the holes. But I do recommend that you repeat the process for the left bag, because if you mess up while transferring your holes, the bag is gonna be messed up. And once you've done the first bag, it's very easy to measure the second one and just drill the holes like you did the first one. And then if you take your time, both of them are gonna be perfect. In conclusion, I think these Viking bags are well worth the money, and I would totally invest in the locked version because nobody got time for padlocks and they look goofy. The locks that come with the Viking bags are very smooth and they look pretty good. The bags fit well on the Vulcan 900. The brackets, well, they do the job if installed properly, and they are very solid. I hope this helps you to install the brackets on your Vulcan 900. Have a good day. And now let's go try them on the open road.